this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and we are back for a special edition podcast. We've been on hiatus for a little while, and we have a special guest today, which is Portland Mayor Ethan Strimling. Thanks for coming in, Ethan.
Glad to be here.
And if you like this podcast, please make a point of going on, what do we call that? What is that thing? iTunes. That thing they call iTunes, and leaving us a review. And we'd like very much if you told your friends to listen. So Ethan asked to come in for this because he was the subject of a column that was a little rough, written by me, criticizing his position on a number of procedural issues more than actual issues regarding his wanting to nominate himself to be the chairman of the finance committee of the council. And let me start out by reading a little bit of the column, Ethan, and give you a chance to respond. Okay, so this is from December 18th. The final results from the 2017 election are finally in, and Portland Mayor Ethan Strimling is the loser without even being on the ballot. After a year of trying to acquire some allies on the city council to back him in his ongoing power struggle with city manager John Jennings, Strimling is now more isolated than ever. On Monday, he found himself at the wrong end of an 8-1 vote on his proposal to appoint himself chairman of the Budget Writing Finance Committee. It was one of those obscure procedural votes that don't matter much outside City Hall, but they tell you a lot about what people inside the building are thinking. For Strimling, it was proof that the entrenched powers in Portland were still not ready for a real mayor, one that's elected by the people. But for the councilors who just watched Strimling and his advisor, Stephen Beal at Progressive Portland, try and fail to replace two of them with Strimling-friendly candidates this year, there was no appetite for feeding the mayor's ego. And it goes on and talks about sort of the history of the mayor's position. Ethan is the second person to hold the position, elected in 2015. It was created by the people in 2010. The first mayor was Michael Brennan, elected in 2011. That's right. It's a fairly new position. There's been a lot of dispute about what its powers are and what they're not. And so, Ethan, thanks for coming in. And let me offer you to make any response you wanted to that excerpt.
Sure. For me, though, it's not really the specifics of the column. It's more the focus of the column, again, from my perspective, focusing on personality issues as opposed to what's some of the policies that we're trying to implement in the city. There was a very important conversation we were trying to have about what is the role of the mayor here and what does the charter say. And if you had written a column about that, that would have been, I think, interesting for people. It would have been helpful in terms of the dialogue about, are we transforming the government the way the people asked us to, the way the Press Herald asked Portland voters to do back in 2010? It was this fundamental change, and we've had struggles trying to implement that. And when you and I talked about it before you wrote that column, we talked about how has this been going? And instead, it feels like you decided to write about personalities and isolation and give it no historical context. My interest, we're trying to pass substantial policy at city government. We have passed. We just passed a pesticide ordinance, and the Press Herald was silent. We just passed.
That's not true. I mean, it was in the newspaper.
Well, sorry, the editorial board. The editorial board. Yes, I'm not talking.
But let me ask you this: so is whether or not the mayor sits on a committee as its chairman or not as its chairman, is that a substantive issue of policy?
I think it's a substantive issue of policy to talk about, are we implementing the charter as it was created when the people transformed our government in 2010? Are we being able to actualize that? That I think and do I think the mayor serving on committees? Absolutely. As you and I talked about, the mayor's role is to, in many ways, have substantial influence over the budget process. You didn't address any of those issues in your column to say, is that actually, let's look at this. Is it actually useful to have the mayor as the chair of the finance committee? Would that help us to actualize the charter? And or, more importantly, would it help to implement the vision that the mayor was elected on by the people? You didn't answer that question. You just went back to sort of this personality politics, same thing that sort of happened to Mike Brennan, and you're just carrying it forward. I'm saying look at the question and answer it from a perspective of, okay, let's step back. Let's put the personalities aside. People like each other, don't like each other. That happens in politics all the time. The mayor's asked a question. The mayor's asked the question of, should the mayor chair the finance committee? Is that a good idea? You didn't answer that question.
Well, because the debate and the vote, the 8-1 vote against you, was not about whether a mayor should chair a committee. It was about whether this mayor should chair this committee, and people were pretty specific about that.
No, I don't think you heard the debate that. Well, there was no debate that night.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about what I heard, in the press and
you're telling me that in
interviews.
The press you didn't see quotes from other councilors saying we don't think any mayor should chair the finance committee. Then go read the newspaper, because that was the debate we were having for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my take on it was that people were saying that it was you that they didn't trust to do this, and
right.
that maybe if you had started in a different way, maybe I think one of the counselors suggested if you had started out as a committee member for a year, right. and then maybe next year.
What I'm saying to you is, go to the fundamental question here. We're trying. Okay. There are people in the city. So let me step back. There are people in the city who are now saying, we transformed our government. We want a mayor. We want to try to implement progressive policy in this city. And we are trying. And the Press Herald editorial board, from my perspective, has not been engaging in that conversation. Okay. Whether you like it or don't like it, like I just said, we passed a pesticide ordinance. The editorial board is silent. We property tax relief for seniors and rental relief for seniors, 1,000 people, silent. Bayside properties being sold, trying to make sure that we build housing down there, silent. We are in these conversations. Corporate welfare, accountability, a huge issue, and that we finally got through, and it's been silent. But when the Press Herald editorial board decides to engage, it becomes about personality. That's where I get. So
this wasn't the editorial board; it was me. But okay. I think that none of this, who sits on the committee is not an issue of substantive policy. And I'm unclear what the policy agenda that you are trying to promote is that is somehow being thwarted by either your relationship with the city manager or with the other councilors. When you talk about the pesticide ordinance, yeah. that of course passed,
yes,
with a lot of support yes. on the council. When you talk about the buildings at the old Public Works space, yep, those plans are getting submitted. They're moving through. So
it's good stuff, and you're not focusing
it is good
on
stuff.
It.
And so
exactly
what?
Right.
So but what?
Some
is,
of it, although I'd
what
say
are
with
you
Bayside,
what are you being prevented from doing by virtue of not being able to chair a committee?
Well, what I'm saying again is that you or the Press Herald editorial board try to get engaged in the policy and see what's going on instead of getting engaged in the personality. Now, obviously, if you don't see a difference, if you don't think that appointments and who gets appointed to what committee matters, then I don't think you followed government for very long, because who's on what committee matters significantly. But more important in this, if we want to have a conversation about structure of government, it is very important that the mayor, right? You wrote a column about a couple years ago talking about with India Street, hey, wait a minute here. Is the council following policy being driven by the city manager, or actually it's supposed to be from the mayor? You wrote that, hey, we kind of said the policy should be driven by the mayor, and then the council responds. That, to me, is why the mayor should be chair of the finance committee, because that's where we drive the budget process. That's what the charter states clearly. Mm-hmm. But from a bigger perspective, where I don't think you're getting it in terms of what's happening with our government, is same thing happened to Mike Brennan, right? Mike Brennan came in. It was a brand new position. Within a few years, same kind of isolation, thrown under the bus. You can say all of that took away his ability to set the agenda. The same kind of issues were going on that are happening now. Mm-hmm. And for you not to see that historical context to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe what we've put into place isn't working, and we need to take another look at it, or maybe people aren't implementing it. I don't know which one it is, but if you want to get engaged in that conversation, do it. But just stay the personality stuff. It's a useless exercise.
Well,
but
you say all right. So you say the committee assignments matter, and who the chairman is matters, And so it's significant that all 8 counselors refused to put you in chair of the committee. That, I think, is if it's true that it's really important
who was right.
Who was right?
That was the question I'm looking for you to weigh in on. Don't tell me what the vote count was. I know that. The newspaper knows that. Weigh in and say who was right. Should those 8 counselors have done that? Or should the mayor have tried to appoint himself? That's the question to answer in your column. Is it right for the mayor to actually, I look at it and I say to myself, you know what, Strimling, that's a really terrible idea, you being chair of finance, and here's why. Or, hey, counselors, what? Why did you all unite around the mayor? What are you scared of about having the people's voice as the chair of the committee? That's an interesting question.
Okay, so you're the people's voice?
Well, as the mayor, I'm the people's voice in City Hall. I'm a full-time...
Anybody else a people's voice?
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course, every member there is. Every member there is. But, there's a difference, obviously, between who's elected. I assume you think that because you supported having an elected mayor. That it's very clear that the people say to the mayor, you are our full-time representative. You're the only member of this body who is full-time, and we want your eyes and your ears. You are now our political leader, according to our charter and according to our commission. You are our eyes, ears, and voice.
Okay.
So we put our hopes and dreams there.
Why is it that you have... so little support from your colleagues on this?
You still didn't answer the question. Is it right?
I
think there's a power struggle.
I observed. That's what I'm observing is a power struggle, and I commented that what I saw was that that you were isolated on the council.
Right, just like Mike Brennan was the same, right? And that, of course, is not part of your conversation.
Mike Brennan, it was slightly different, but yes, yeah, Mike Brennan.
How different?
Well, he got his policy through. As I guess you are.
As I am.
Yeah. And his struggles came fairly late in the...
it took a few years, I would say. That's true.
Yes. You're precocious. You got into it earlier.
No, I think it may be later in his term, but it's been 6 years that we're looking at this. But that's actually not quite true because within the first year, the city council took away his right to set the agenda. That was 2012. So even that, right, is taken out of the historical context of this. That's what, for me, and I'm. If you guys want to engage in the conversation about whether the charter is working or not, engage in that. Don't engage in the conversation of personalities. That's where I think people look at it and say, how is this going to help my life? I want pesticides banned. Does the Press Herald have something to say about that? Or I want to try to make sure there's more housing built in Bayside. That's what the mayor's pushing for right now. Do we agree with the mayor or don't we agree with the mayor? Or the mayor's trying to push for property tax relief or all of these, or earned sick time next year, what we're trying to put through, or universal pre-K. This is what the mayor's trying to push for. Engage in that conversation. Are those the right things for the mayor to push for or not?
But so much of what you do is around this notion that other people are misreading the charter and that you are not getting the authority that...
Then weigh in on that question.
Well, I think I kind of did.
No, you weighed in on the personality of the mayor being isolated. You didn't weigh in on whether or not you think that is the issue.
Okay.
If you think that that's the question, I'd love to have that conversation. I think we've now seen with 2 mayors, there are struggles, right? I sit down with counselors. Look, I think a lot of people look at it right now and they say to themselves, I don't know if maybe you're not one of them, but they look at it and say, I'm not sure if this charter was exactly what we wanted it to be. Right. So let's have that conversation. Some people say, I might even say, look, you want to go back to the old one or go to a new one, but this system is a little wacky, but I'm doing my best to try to make it work, just like we all are. You want to weigh in on that conversation? Fine.
Well, let's... I have another question. So part of this column and some of the the coverage we've had over the last year or two has involved the group Progressive Portland, which is a 501c3. What do you call it?
I don't know.
We call it a public advocacy group that does online organizing and some polling, and it was started by Stephen Beal, who is a longtime supporter of yours.
He didn't vote for me, by the way, but
really?
Yeah. Well, that's what he tells me anyway. But I'm pretty.
That's what he tells people. But he wrote a column with Lance Dutson saying that he was a big supporter of you.
Was that before the election?
Before the election.
All right.
So
my understanding is he voted for Tom McMillan. He voted for the Green, but
I don't know.
Okay.
You know,
if he did, that's great. I'm honored to have his
inside
vote.
the sanctity of the voting booth, everybody's. Yeah. But so anyway, so he's somebody that you've worked with. Emily Figdor, his wife, was the former head of the local Democratic Party, and also the head of the Four Schools bond issue, which you were very engaged with.
Yep.
There is a sense that these guys organize in a way that is divisive, that they the notion that there's a progressive Portland and then something else within the city, something that's not progressive, and it doesn't seem to capitalize on the the wide compatibility of a lot of people in Portland, and it focuses on extremes in which people are divided. And
look, you can have Progressive Portland come in here and talk about that if you want to. I don't know where you get even that statement. 65% of the people supported the four-school bond. The Portland Press Herald editorial board did not.
Yeah.
That means the Portland Press Herald editorial board is out of step with the people of Portland, and Progressive Portland and Pons and all these groups are more in touch if you want to just say what you just were bringing to the table. So look, Progressive Portland, I've worked with Progressive Portland. I'm working right now with the Maine Women's Lobby. I'm working with the Southern Maine Workers Center, working with Portland Pesticides. I will work with any groups that are trying to bring forward policy. That
so you're not more close with Stephen than you are with those other groups?
I will work with, I have
my question is, how closely aligned are you with Stephen and
on what issue?
Every issue, their agenda.
Depends on what the issue is, but on earned sick time, I've met with Eliza and Drew for 6 months. But I'm not shy about being supportive of what Progressive Portland is trying to accomplish, not at all. Right? Progressive Portland is trying to accomplish passing pesticides, rebuilding our four schools.
So who are you working with
on earned sick time? I'm working with Eliza Townsend, who's the executive director of the Maine Women's Lobby, Drew Christopher Joy, who's with the Southern Maine Workers Center. These are great folks who are doing good work. I worked with on some of the housing stuff, Homeless Voices for Justice. They came in quite a bit. Also worked with some of the housing advocates. I met with DSA to talk to them about some of the housing issues. I work with a lot of different groups. When I put together my State of the City last year, I talked to the Chamber of Commerce. When you talk about the mayor should be driving the agenda, right? My State of the City last year drove a progressive agenda like you haven't seen, right? The kind of stuff that I would bet 90% of that speech, you said, yeah, that's the kind of stuff. But you don't talk about that, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about the divisive stuff as opposed to how are we? I'm very proud of the first 2 years of this. Why all
the sneakiness about whether you're with them or not? I mean,
I just said I got no problem with Progressive Portland.
But you're, you just say they're one of many groups that you have no special ties to them than you do with.
I'm not on their board anymore. I'm not
anymore.
No, I'm not on their board any more than I'm on an advisory of some other committee. I'm not, but I think Progressive Portland does good work. I'm glad. I don't know. I mean, honestly. You've had a bee in your bonnet about them for a long time, and I've been a little bit like, I couldn't believe that column you wrote where you attacked them for doing a scorecard. I was like, Maine People's Alliance does a scorecard every year. You've never attacked the Maine People's Alliance. All of these groups do. AFL-CIO does a scorecard every year. You're a good labor guy. I'm a good labor guy. You never attack them for a scorecard.
But I guess here's
somehow or
in the universe of
group.
This is what I saw is different. In the universe of the state of Maine, Maine People's Alliance is representing a group or a group of issues that has strong opposition throughout the state, and it's important for.
They just won the Maine by 60%. They don't have strong.
I'm not
opposition.
saying that they're not right, and I'm not saying that they don't have support, but they have a lot of people in the legislature who are actively opposed to them. They are a counterpoint to business organizations.
What do you think just happened with the rent control ordinance? The business community came in and spent $300,000. Okay, how much did Progressive Portland or these progressive groups that you don't like?
Well, they didn't touch it. They stayed away from the rent control.
I don't. Well, again, I'm not a member. I'm not on their board, but I believe that they supported it. I believe a lot of groups supported it, and the business community spent $300,000. Don't you think that the business community was involved in the housing battles last year?
Sure.
And why we didn't get as much pass as we would have liked to on tenant protections? Of course they were in front of the council. right? The business community is very involved. Don't make a mistake that they aren't. The business community got involved on the 2-school option. All of a sudden came in and started spending money on that piece. So on all of these, on the view, and I agreed with them on the issue around, sorry, not the views, the issue of the rezoning in terms of the planning
Question
board.
2.
They got involved. So don't tell me that there isn't opposition in the city of Portland. It's very hard. I don't get progressives who say it should be easy to pass stuff through the Portland City Council. I agree with you. I think it should be easy. It's not. It's very difficult. And people's voices rising up and being part of that process, I'm very glad to have them be there. Do I support every action that every group does? Of course not. I don't think that you should be going in there and doing stuff that does more harm than good. But here's what I know. We got a 4-school bond pass. Took us 23 years, despite the folks who didn't want to have it passed, despite the Press Herald editorial board running against it, right? I mean, we got it done.
We're not always right. I'm willing to admit that. I mean, I would make the argument that raising all the money from property tax is not necessarily the more progressive approach. That making at least an attempt to tap into income tax and sales tax, getting sort of regional money behind the schools, was worth a shot. And but that's
Except
how things
we had
go.
done that. I mean, we don't have to read
Whatever.
that.
Yeah,
but we had done that 100 times for the state, and the state had already said no. And you guys had actually supported the 4 schools and then flip-flopped on it. And I would say to you, you started this by saying somehow Progressive Portland is not a voice for the city. Well, they were again that bond won more than anything else on the ballot. Even the no rent control people did not win their no position as well as that one did. So how do you step back and say they're not part of the vote? You don't think that an overwhelming majority of the people of the city support pesticide ban? I do. I think they support senior tax relief. I do. I think that they support trying to build more housing. I think those are the issues that these progressive groups are fighting for, and I'm glad to have them part of the conversation.
All right. So here's my central question, and
hair gel.
Yeah, the hair. No, we'll get to the hair gel later. To what end? What do you achieve if you get the ability to set the agenda? What is the thing that you're pushing that you think is not going to get pushed without you having more say in sort of what issues come up and when they come up?
It's about, I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you're talking about chair of finance, that conversation's done.
They're done.
Unhappy on finance. That's going to be a good place for us to go forward. I think what happened in 2010 was people transformed their government. They said, we want more democracy. We want to elect a mayor.
For what? To
get our voice. All of the things that we're talking about, plus more.
To say
plus
what?
Better housing.
What is it? What is it they're saying with that voice? What's the
I think
substance of what it is that you're trying to
universal
achieve.
pre-K, earned sick time, a budget that reflects our values, all of these issues. Why did you want an elected mayor? Did you want an elected mayor to merely come in to try to make sure that everybody gets along? No. You wanted an elected mayor to come in to try to push a vision and to try to say to the council, let's bring this vision to the table. And if the council says no, then the council says no.
So what's preventing you from doing that?
It isn't. I'm doing that every day. But I think that there are obstacles that are unfortunately, this power struggle occurs. The same thing that happened to Mike Brennan. I can't say it enough, right? There's this power struggle in terms of implementing it. But I'm going to keep fighting every day. I'm going to keep going in. I'm going to try to do what I believe the people want me to do every single day. And I get it that there'll be pushback. I wish that the Press Herald editorial board would get engaged in that conversation and try to say, hey, you know what? In 2010, we supported creating an elected mayor because we wanted a strong voice, because we wanted somebody to drive policy, because we wanted them to be the political leader of the city. And you shouldn't, city council, be stepping in and trying to block that from happening if you believe that. But you didn't have that conversation. In that column, you had a conversation about what I think is petty personalities, as opposed to asking the fundamental question, who was right in this conversation? Because I've lost lots of 8-1 votes. And Greg, I think you would agree I was right on those 8-1 votes because you would have had the same vote. I'll bet that's the case. So
yeah, there's a lot of things you said there. I still don't know what it is. What is the progressive agenda that's not being pursued? And it's not that we didn't invent this issue of the council refusing you to sit on a committee. This is like an unprecedented occurrence, as far as I'm aware, that where the council just voted with no debate to reject your whole slate.
Exactly. Why didn't you write that? Right. Unprecedented. So what?
Yeah.
What?
So what's different?
What's different about what?
What's different now? Why is it different now? Why would
because
for the
in
first time?
2010. Well, remember, in 2012, the city council voted almost the same vote to say to Mike Brennan, you can't set the agenda. Right? There is a struggle between the council's office and the mayor's office in terms of what the people put in place. That conversation you should engage in, and I would beg you to take the personalities out of it.
Well, I'm hearing a struggle between councilors and Ethan Strimling. I'm hearing.
I know, because you don't want to look at the context.
No, I look at the context.
So why was it there? Did you think it was the same with Mike Brennan?
I think there were things about Michael Brennan that they didn't like.
Okay.
I'm willing to go out.
That's the same thing. I agree with you.
And
there are things about me they don't like.
And I think they, he irritated people, and there were certain things that he didn't do that in a way that they, some councilors wanted, and they thought that you would be would be a unifying force and somebody who could. My understanding was you were going to bring people together. You're going to coalesce. There's already strong positions on the council, shared positions, and what we've seen is 2 years of first fighting with the city manager, and now into the second year of fighting with the council. Or and we haven't quite gotten to your state of the city yet. So that personal dynamic. Has an effect in terms of how issues move through this deliberative process.
But at some point or another, you have to look. Sure, of course, personality matters, but that's a two-way street. And when you see that it's happened now twice, where councils have said, we don't like the mayor, at some level, do you look at the council as part of that conversation to say what might be happening there? And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying engage in that conversation. But most people are looking at it right now, and I believe in the city of Portland, and saying, what's going on with our charter? This doesn't seem to be what we wanted. This ain't quite working, right? It's not about, we elected that mayor to be our voice, to carry our vision, whatever that is. It's the only person who can full-time work on that and implement it for us, and we elect that person to do it. Boy, this seems like there's some real gridlock around that. Engage in that conversation if you want. But as you just said, the exact same thing happened to Mike. And at some point, you got to start asking the question. All right. Why is that happening?
I want to ask a different question. One of the among the things that you're criticized for that Brennan was not is engagement with Augusta. And there was at least a perception that he was up in Augusta lobbying for the city more often than you are, and that really a lot of the problems that we can identify in Portland, from housing to immigrant services, GA, homelessness, have statewide implications. Sure. And so what's going on there? Are you going up to Augusta?
No, I think it's fair criticism. It has not been a top priority of mine in the first 2 years. I have felt like in Augusta right now, unfortunately, it's very hard to get anything done, and it's like banging your head against the wall. So I wanted to embrace how can we solve these problems down here. As we see in Augusta, the gridlock is even worse than what we see on the city council. We see things, people work on them all year long, and they get vetoed by the governor, and then they can't be overridden. We see the flip-flops on the Republican side of the aisle. It's very frustrating. And I've looked at that and I've said, where's the best use of my time? And I have felt like the best use of my time is really trying to focus on what can we be doing? What can we implement here in the city of Portland? And it's why I feel pretty good about a lot of the things that we've done. I mean, the TIF reform that we passed down here, it's the first in the state. Sorry. We created accountability around anybody who gets corporate welfare in the city of Portland. Now, you have to pay people a reasonable wage. We are the first community to do that.
Conditions on
TIFs.
On TIFs for tax breaks for developers.
Exactly. Conditions on tax breaks for developers. They've got to pay a prevailing wage. We banned pesticides. We created the Office of Economic Opportunity to help immigrants get into jobs. We have provided rent relief to low-income seniors. I embraced, we need to do it here at home, because we sure aren't going to get much help at the federal level right now. And at the state level, I didn't see us getting much help from Governor LePage. We went to the governor a number of times. I personally called the governor to say, will you help us pay for our schools? And we got nowhere. So I've looked locally act globally, think statewide. I'm trying to act locally. That's been my focus. It's a fair criticism for people who feel like the mayor was really supposed to be somebody, our lobbyist. We have very good lobbyists up there. If they ever ask, I'll be there in a heartbeat. I may get more engaged in some conversations, but honestly, I felt like the best work I could do, and I think we're showing the results, is right here locally. We are getting substantial policy passed for the people of the city of Portland that we haven't seen in a long time. And we haven't seen, I think Mayor Brennan had a good track record in terms of what he was able to do from the state level. There was some good work up there. What I'm focusing on is the local.
So you used to promote your relationship with the governor as more positive than Brennan's was. So Brennan became kind of a flashpoint in arguments with the governor. Has your approach worked?
Unfortunately,
what is your relationship with the governor?
I haven't really talked to him in probably about a year. I saw him at an event maybe about 6 months ago, and we chatted a little bit. Still friendly. It's still, in the end, I think the ideological matters much more than the personal. People used to say to Barack Obama all the time that the problem was he wasn't playing golf with Republicans, and we know that's just not the case. It's not about how are you getting along with people ultimately. It's about what are you fighting for and what are the differences in those ideologies. The governor and I, whatever at a personal level, we may be able to have a good conversation with each other, but our ideology is so different that I think in the end, the biggest area where I really called him to ask for help was around the schools. I called him a number of times. Can you anyway encourage the Board of Education to go up a couple more slots? They wouldn't go up a couple more slots. Our schools didn't get funded. It's why we had to go for 4 schools, and it's why the people's voice became so strong in the city. And it's a frustration of mine that I don't feel like you're embracing the people's voice in the way that they are lobbying the council in a way that they haven't in the past. And we're getting stuff. That's the key. We're getting stuff done that we haven't done in the past. And instead of saying, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting, the council actually is doing more progressive stuff than they've done in the past. There's been some substantial policy passed. You focus on some of this personality.
Well, what I'm hearing, and this probably supports what you're saying, is that there's an impression that the government's dysfunctional. That you're not getting anything done because
at the council level, well, that's not true. But.
And it's not true,
Right.
and I know that's not true. And
right about it.
Well, it's kind of hard to do when you pour gasoline over your head and set yourself on fire. You kind of gets a lot of the attention. Maybe.
I'm here today to say, look, I will blow the fire out.
Why don't you have your own podcast? You're certainly welcome to come here, but you could do this from City Hall. I mean, how do you communicate with people? You did sort of interesting thing with public, sitting outside of public spaces last summer. And,
yeah, I still do that. That's the part of this job that's the best, is staying connected to the people that I serve, and I try to make sure that I do that. I have what's called office hours out on the street, sidewalk office hours, and those are great.
Do people know who you are?
Yes. No doubt about it. For better or worse, and that's part of what I like about it. I can walk down the street and have one person yelling at me because I did the wrong thing, and the next person applauding me because I did the right thing, and that's kind of democracy that I believe in, which is real engagement from people. So, I go on different radio stations, and in any kind of those conversations, I often try to say, let's make sure that we take callers. I was doing a segment on CTN to make sure that we're trying to connect with people on that as well. But I think it's very important. You can become very isolated in a job like this, and I've got to stay out. It's part of why I'm coming out here. Out here. Out here. I know you guys are living in another state. It feels like
media world headquarters. Yeah. I put this up on Facebook and asked people had any questions for you. And one question was, do you have a timeline for the new homeless shelter?
We don't have a timeline. We are sending it out to architects at the moment to try to get some people to come in. Somebody did some basic work earlier, which was voluntary pro bono, but we want to start getting some more specific designs. The key is going to be where it goes, right? Another great battle that I hope you get involved in. This is going to be the name of the game. Where does it go? Location, location, location. It's easy to figure out what a good space would look like, how that might work. Not easy, but we know how it works best. But where this goes, and there are a lot of us who do not believe that it should go on the outskirts of town. It needs to be somewhere central. And hopefully we'll be able to find the space to do that. And then we're going to have to find the resources to do it as well.
And the other question was a reader in Buxton wants to know what kind of hair gel do you use?
I don't use any hair gel. I know I've had this reputation for some reason for quite some time. People always like to talk about my hair. I will take it as a compliment.
Yes, the record show
the mane that I
has
have.
Luxurious curly
would
hair.
you like to rub the way Jimmy Fallon did with it? Ruined his career. It might ruin yours.
Let the record show that I did not touch the mayor's hair.
To prove that there is no gel in it. Okay. Is there gel in your hair?
There is not. There is not.
A little lightening on the side. Do you put the gray in on purpose?
I do it for respect.
I do the same.
To give them a little more. Well, hey, thanks for coming in. This has been interesting, and I think you raised some very good points, and I will do a little introspection, and maybe you should too.
No, I will not do any introspection.
And I hope people enjoyed the podcast, and if they did, please feel free to share it and give us a review on iTunes, and whether they did or whether they didn't, if they wanted to give me any feedback, you can always reach me at gkesich@pressherald.com. And that's it for today. Thanks.
Glad to be here.